It's a real privilege for me to be invited here to share my story. And I say that because it was not that long ago that I was sitting in the auditorium at ADFA, listening to someone that I look up to sharing their story that little did I know was going to have a massive impact on my life moving forward from that point. Now, I can't guarantee that my story or my presentation will have the same effect for you this evening, but I hope that in some small part, maybe some of it will resonate for you. So I was told once that a good presentation always starts with a quote. So the quote I've picked for this afternoon is this one: "Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it," from a gentleman called Charles Swindoll. And this is a quote that I stumbled across very early on after my accident, and it's something that's resonated with me every day since then. Many of you in the room can probably already see the relevance and the power of this quote, but as I go through the presentation this afternoon, I just want you to keep that in mind. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. My journey started, like many, it started with a dream. Ever since the age of 6, I only ever had one goal. I wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Royal Australian Air Force, flying one of these things, an FA-18F Super Hornet. And everything I did from that young age was directed towards achieving that goal. I studied hard at school. I watched Top Gun far too many times. I was even lucky enough to learn to fly at the age of 15 before I could legally drive a car. From there, I got one step closer to that dream when I was accepted into the Australian Defence Force Academy and became a pilot trainee in the Air Force. Little did I know that for me to achieve that dream was going to become pretty much impossible. Towards the end of our second year at the Academy, we travelled out to Jervis Bay to conduct a normal leadership training exercise. We spent a week out there doing all sorts of crazy activities, abseiling face first down cliff faces and various other things. Little did we know that that week-long exercise was going to accumulate in one challenge for us all. On the 21st of November 2015, this was our reality. When the bus we were travelling on to come back here to Canberra went around a bend and rolled over to end up sprawled across a quiet country road. And although that bus only rotated through 90 degrees, it turned my whole world upside down. Now, we were incredibly lucky that day. We were lucky that as the other buses in the convoy arrived at the scene, the staff and the trainee officers on board quickly disembarked and rapidly got to work. Many of them were approaching those who were now climbing out of the bus, taking them aside, sitting them down on the side of the road, and conducting first aid as best they could. Others became involved in the coordination side of things, trying to get word out to the emergency services and back to ADFA to let them know that an accident had taken place. My part, little did I know, my first instinct was to try to get out of the bus to get to safety, but I couldn't. I didn't know at the time that my left hand was pinned to the road by the side of the bus. But I was lucky that day that some of the staff climbed into the bus, and seeing my predicament, they rapidly took action, which ultimately saved my life. After applying tourniquets to both my arms to try and stop the bleeding, they then stayed with me for nearly 2 hours, tending to my injuries and trying to help me to remain calm by telling me all sorts of jokes and stories that I'm definitely not game enough to repeat here this afternoon. But there were many times in that bus where I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to get out of the bus. I didn't know what was going to happen to my hand. I had absolutely no idea. So instead I chose to focus on the one thing I figured I could control: my breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, repeat. And from there I tried to remain calm, to listen to what those around me were telling me to do, and I set myself the first ever goal in my recovery: to arrive at hospital with a pulse. And thanks to the efforts of so many people that day, I achieved that goal. As the doctors were then preparing me for the first of many surgeries, they asked me a question that I never thought I'd hear. A doctor's face appeared in my field of view, and they asked me a simple question: can we amputate your hand? And as the reality of that question sank in, all I could think of was one person. Earlier that year, former Navy clearance diver Paul DeGelder came to the Australian Defence Force Academy and shared his incredible story of not only surviving a shark attack, but then going on to live an amazing and inspiring life. I mean, he now jumps out of aeroplanes and swims with sharks to film documentaries for the Discovery Channel. And as I pondered that question, thinking of Paul, I remember thinking to myself that if someone like him can go through that terrible occurrence, but still live an amazing life, maybe I too will be okay. So with that in mind, I looked the doctors in the eye and I gave them my answer: yes, amputate my hand. As you can imagine, being involved in an accident like that left me with a number of physical injuries. But what I never expected were the mental challenges, which sort of came out of the blue and to this day are probably the toughest ones to overcome. Believe it or not, for me, the fact that I'd lost my left hand didn't really worry me at all. Far more concerning was the fact that that childhood dream had basically just disappeared overnight in a cloud of gravel, bitumen dust and broken glass. I'd also faced a massive change to my identity. I'd gone from a fit and healthy 20-year-old to an amputee overnight. And on an even smaller scale, there was all sorts of unhelpful questions and thoughts that were going through my mind. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Or even more simply, what now? What now is my life going to look like now that I only have one hand? Will I be able to look after myself day to day, let alone to go on and chase goals and dreams? That was a tough thing to try and overcome. And to do that, I remember thinking about this idea of resilience. I feel like it's a word we see used a lot to describe sports stars recovering from injuries, inspiring people in the community achieving amazing things. But it wasn't until I was lying in the hospital bed, face to face with this massive challenge, that I began to ask the question of how. How on earth am I supposed to be resilient? So I want to share with you my personal view of resilience. And that is, it's nothing but a series of consistent small choices made by you one at a time. No matter what challenges we face, no matter what goals it is that we're chasing, I think there's always a choice of some sort. And it's an often overlooked fact that it's not generally the big decisions that make all the difference. Usually it's the small choices that we make now or in the next 2 hours, the choices we make day after day that ultimately compound over time and lead to either overcoming an obstacle or achieving a goal. And one of the first choices I had to confront as I was going through those early days in hospital was my mindset. I quickly came to terms with the fact that regardless of what I thought, regardless of how I felt, I can't go back. I can't go back and stop the bus ride ever. Likewise, I can't go back and pick a different seat. All of that is history. I was also learning, thanks to some feedback from my family and friends, that no matter how angry I got at them, at the bus driver, at the accident itself, none of that was going to bring my hand back either. And when I boiled it down, I had a very simple choice to make. I could pour my time and effort into getting angry and upset and bitter, or instead I could pour everything I had each and every day from that point forward into getting better, to moving that needle even just the slightest bit to get back to living a normal life. My first choice in my recovery was to get better, not bitter. I shared with you previously my first goal in my recovery. I want to share with you my second. I thought it was going to be something cool like learning to tie my shoelaces with one hand, but actually it was a little bit smaller than that. The doctors came into my hospital room after a few days, worried looks on their faces, and they said, "Mate, we're a little bit concerned. You've been here for 3 or 4 days now, and as far as we know, you haven't been to the bathroom. We don't know why that is. We don't know if it's the medication we've got you on or if you've got internal injuries. So basically what we need from you is this. Within the next 24 hours, at the bare minimum, we need you to fart." And I remember thinking to myself, being a military member, no worries, doc, challenge accepted, come back in 24 hours. And it wasn't until he left the room that I remember thinking, holy cow. In the space of just a few days, my goals have gone from wanting to fly one of the most technologically advanced aircraft in the world to now my sole mission is to fart. What I can tell you though is that you have never seen anyone celebrate a fart like I did. I yelled, cheered, screamed. My parents, we literally threw a party in the hotel room. It was like I'd won a medal at the Olympics. But that's the kind of consistent small choices I had to revert back to. One of my other favourite choices during my time in hospital was to pull on my fancy red non-slip socks and roam around the halls of the hospital. And it never mattered how far I went. Some days I'd go 10 steps like I did in this photo. Some days you'd go down the corridor and around the corner. The distance didn't matter. Instead, it was that choice. Because every time I chose to pull on those socks, I was in control. I was actively moving my situation forward in a positive direction, bit by bit. And in reality, my recovery has been nothing but a series of consistent small choices, one at a time. In early 2016, I was fitted with a pretty awesome robotic hand, like the one I've got this evening. And that brought with it a whole bunch of choices, because I now had to learn how to use it. For the first 3 weeks I had the hand, I spent somewhere in the order of 6 to 8 hours a day, every day, doing simple tasks like this, putting pegs in and out of a pegboard. And as you can see from this photo, I sucked. If I've done one thing more than anything else since that accident, I have failed over and over again. But every time I dropped those pegs, once again, I had a very small choice. Do I give up, or do I try again just one more time? And by repeatedly making that choice, no matter how tough things got, no matter how frustrated I was, eventually those pegs turned into blocks. The blocks turned into even bigger boxes. Before I knew it, I was back home in Lismore doing this, flying an aeroplane again for the first time, just over 3 months after the accident, and just 3 short weeks after getting the robotic hand. One of my other small choices then was to come back down to Canberra and to finish my training at the Australian Defence Force Academy. And to this day, this is one of my proudest moments, standing on the parade ground, graduating alongside my peers. Not because I'd graduated from the academy, but for me, that was getting back to normal. I was wearing the uniform again like I was doing before the accident. I was doing exactly the same things, even passing the fitness test. I was back to normal. Anything beyond that was a bonus. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't practical for me to continue on to pilot's course in the military due to the nature of military flying and some of the risks involved. But that hasn't stopped me from continuing to chase that dream. I've been incredibly fortunate to work as a flying instructor, sharing my passion for flying with others and helping them to achieve their goals. And more recently, I've just started working for my childhood hero, helping to fly families into Sydney for medical appointments and working towards aerobatic goals. But even more special than that is the continual opportunity day after day to share my passion for flying with others, doing all sorts of crazy things in aeroplanes that once I thought was impossible.
And you can see that my brother's absolutely loving that. He wouldn't let me include the spew bag either.
So there we go. So the other thing that I've learned from my journey is that change brings opportunity. And in all honesty, it's generally been the biggest obstacles or the craziest challenges that I've faced that have led to the most incredible experiences that I've ever imagined. And one such opportunity for me was the Invictus Games. I was incredibly privileged to represent Australia for the first time over in 2017 in Toronto, Canada, but even more privileged to come back again in 2018 just up the road in Sydney, this time on home soil. And this photo here is my favourite photo in the presentation, because in that photo there are 72 different athletes, 72 different people, all of whom have their own journeys they've been on, their own challenges they've had to overcome, their own unique stories. And for 12 months, I got to learn from each and every one of them. But the really cool thing about the Invictus Games team, from my point of view, was that it didn't really matter. It didn't matter what your injury was. It didn't matter whether you sustained that injury while training here in Australia or on operations overseas. What was most important is that you were there. You were part of the team. And together we encouraged and inspired each other to improve ourselves and each other through the incredible healing power of sport. But for me, Invictus was definitely a journey. Even as I stand here, you can probably pick that I'm not an athlete. And I remember thinking, what sports would I do? Initially, I thought of running and swimming, but I never thought someone like me, a one-handed guy, could jump on a rowing machine and have any real success. And if it wasn't for the coach who's in the bottom left-hand corner there, actually probably your right-hand corner. No, it is the left, there you go. I never would have given it a go. I actually attended the indoor rowing trials at the ADFA boat shed. I thought I was a spectator, but Tim, the coach, he had other ideas. There was a spare rowing machine for the last 1 minute test. He scanned the crowd for his victim, and seemingly I was it. From there, he threw down the gauntlet, and what happened next blew me away. Everybody, pretty much everyone in that room, most of whom to me at that point in time were complete strangers, rallied around behind me, encouraged and supported me to get on the rowing machine and just give it a go. Some of them even offering last minute tips about how I'd best survive the 1 minute of torture I was about to endure. And I can assure you, the results weren't pretty. They looked something like this. But if I didn't have that support and encouragement from people who were complete strangers to me at that point in time, I never would have stepped out of my comfort zone, let alone to go on and do pretty well at the rowing at both Toronto and Sydney. And I think that says a lot about the power of supporting each other, supporting the people to the left and right of you. Because this idea of Sonda, everyone's got their own journey. And I think generally we all have a role to play. And the other sport I did was sprinting. And you can see from that photo that I do not have the physique of a sprinter. There's not many people at the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games repping a six-pack like that one. So much so that my mates and I would often joke that I was the running marshmallow. But as it turns out, I was lucky to have that extra padding because I did in fact need it. What I want to show you now is a race that we did 4 weeks before the Invictus Games in 2018. We travelled up to Townsville in far north Queensland to participate in a competition, to get a bit of practice in, to get a feel for how competitions worked. But largely, I think the coaches just wanted us to feel the competition nerves. So I'll show you the clip and I'll sort of talk through what happens. So some of the Invictus guys, they did pretty well. They finished in the top 2 or 3. So you'll see them cross the finish line shortly. And then here I come over the finish line there, and things went pear-shaped pretty quickly. Has anyone experienced when something bad happens, time seems to slow down? Has that happened for anyone before? Certainly happened for me. 1 minute I was crossing the finish line thinking, second last, that's not too bad. Followed very quickly by, oh no, I'm going down. I hit the ground hard, I skipped like a rock on the surface of water. And as I came to a stop, only one thought entered my mind. Man, I hope no one saw that. As you can see, there's video evidence, but more importantly, the crowd responded with that sound that everyone makes when there's a big hit at the football. And I just heard this resounding, ooh. Oh boy, I remember thinking to myself, that's not good. Everyone saw that. That's okay. Act cool, get up, dust yourself off, pretend it didn't happen, you'll be okay. So I did, I stood up, I had blood coming out of my face, my shoulder, my thigh, blood coming out of everywhere. That stuff's like sandpaper. But in the name of acting cool, I walked up to one of the other athletes, stuck out my hand and said, well done, mate. That was a great race. Yeah, that's what I thought I said. What actually came out, something more like, and at that point, I knew there was only one option, run. I'm not ashamed to admit I was glad I was wearing my reflective sunnies that day because I had tears streaming out my eyes as I walked back through that crowd to try and find my drink bottle and my shoes before eventually I could find a place to hide. And it sounds almost silly to stand up here and tell you this, but that was probably the closest I've come to ever giving up at something. There I was 4 weeks out from one of the most amazing opportunities I'm probably ever going to get in my life, and I'd just eaten the dirt in front of probably 600 or 700 people. And once again, those unhelpful questions started to return. What am I thinking? Am I nuts? I can't do this. If I go to the Invictus Games in 4 weeks' time and faceplant like that, I'm going to embarrass myself, my family, the entire country. I'm not an athlete. What am I thinking? Once again, it came back to those consistent small choices. And for the next 4 weeks, the coaches and I worked on every minor detail. How would I get into the starting blocks? Which foot's going to hit the ground first after the starting gun goes off? And most importantly, how do I finish that race without falling over? So I want to show you now the 100-metre final for my category at the Invictus Games in 2018.
Clean there. Good start by doing it on the inside. Parker started well just outside of him. Lishkas are going okay. Kaser coming through. It's Parker and Dillon. Parker of Australia extending with 10 to go. Parker, Dillon, Parker! He's got it. Dillon the silver. Kaser the...
There we go. Thankfully a very different result to the race 4 weeks earlier. Now, some of you may have seen as I crossed the finish line there, I threw both my arms in the air. And a lot of people think that was me celebrating the fact I'd won a gold medal. But more importantly to me, I was just glad that I made it from one end of the track to the other without getting too close a look at it. And to this day, I'm glad I did that because that moment led to one of the best photos of me that's ever been taken. And that's this photo here. And when I look at this photo, I see two key things. The first is you can clearly see my injury. And for me, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that I'm an amputee. I'm so proud that I've faced challenges, as we all do, but that hasn't stopped me from being able to live a normal life and continue to chase goals and dreams and hopefully help and assist others along the way. And the other thing I like about this photo is my face. And I will admit I'm not the prettiest guy at the best of times, but I look at my face there and I see nothing but sheer determination. And what I've learned is that with enough time, effort, and sheer determination, almost anything can become possible. So it was a real privilege to win a gold medal representing Australia, but more importantly, to actually share that moment with so many people that have helped me throughout my journey. If I can give you any piece of advice from my talk this evening, it's build a support network of people around you. There's no rule in life that says you have to face challenges by yourself. And I know firsthand that when you do that, not only do things get easier, it actually makes it a whole lot more fun to have those people rallying around you and using their own strengths and abilities to assist the common good. But to finish up, I want to come back to that quote. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. And for me, I see the accident and all those challenges I've faced as less than 10% of my life. That leaves me 90% left to chase my goals and dreams, to try and help people along the way, to continue to try and do my bit to make this world a better place. But the question and the challenge that I want to leave all of you with this evening is a simple one. What are all of you going to do with your 90%? Thank you.